You're listening to Biotalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for Biotalk, where we do interesting interviews of regional professionals who are helping grow the biohealth capital region. Today we have Dr. Julia Finkel, who is a pediatric anesthesiologist at Children's National Medical Center, but also an emerging entrepreneur. Dr. Finkel, welcome to Biotalk.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great to have you. And you also, from what I understand, direct the pain research at the Children's Sheikh Zayed Institute for Pediatric Surgical Innovation, in addition to your pediatric duties. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about your background to introduce the listeners to what you do, how you got there, and what your plans for the future are. So let's talk about your personal background that led you into this career.
Well, I've taken care of infants and children with pain for all of my career, and that's given me the platform to identify the unmet needs in pain care, and frankly has fueled my research interests, which revolve around analgesic pharmacology in infants and children, the study of pain medicines. And the major impasse to doing that well is lack of an objective measure of the endpoint, which is pain or drug effect. Right now, the standard of care has us using subjective pain scales on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your pain, or a series of faces, or in the case of nonverbal individuals, we have observational scales. None of these allow for precision in determining what kind of pain it is or even dose response. And it's true for clinical care as well as for drug development. If you consider pharma, it costs about $1.3 billion to bring a single analgesic to market. And that's because it's very difficult to measure the endpoint. And so it needs endless numbers of patients to be enrolled in order to make these determinations. So that's why an objective measure of pain has become the holy grail of pain medicine. We need to consider that pain is only one word that describes a singular symptom that is caused by a myriad of different causes or mechanisms. And being able to identify those is essential to really targeting the cause of pain and therefore treating it precisely.
Just like a true professional, you jumped right into your research areas, which have led to your great discoveries. But really, I wanted to talk a little bit about your personal background, Julia, before we go into what you're really focused on today. I mean, it's a little bit about your background, where you went to school, how you landed at Children's National Medical Center, and brought you to where you are today.
Oh, okay. Well, I grew up on Long Island. I went to med school at Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse. I then did my residency in anesthesia at University of Maryland, which brought me to Baltimore. And from there, I did a fellowship in pediatric anesthesia at Children's National, which is where I've remained for the last 27 years.
Wow, 27 years. And do you have somebody that's influenced you in your life that led you through this career path?
Well, not any single individual. I started out in internal medicine thinking I wanted to be a rheumatologist. At the time, the drugs that were available to treat these dreadful illnesses were almost as bad as the diseases, and it really was not particularly satisfying. And then I decided I would like some more acute care and would go into critical care medicine, and I was advised to do that through anesthesia. So I bumbled along, and I ended up in the right place by accident, I would say.
And with 27 years, you've probably done many different things at Children's in your career. So walk us through a little bit your career path while you've been there for 27 years.
So I did my fellowship there. I started out leading the acute pain service when I was brought on faculty. But as I evolved, so did Children's. And I think one of the most notable advancements there was basically due to the vision of our current CEO, Kurt Newman, who made innovation a mandate for the hospital. And the first manifestation of that was the establishment of the Sheikh Zayed Institute for Pediatric Surgical Innovation. And in 2009, I was one of the founding members of the Institute and continue to lead the Pain Medicine Initiative.
We have had great experience with Kurt Newman as well, since he serves on the BioHealth Innovation Board. I've gotten to know Kurt quite a bit, and his passion for innovation has permeated the staff and definitely has impacted you, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
That sort of brings us up to date as to how you got to where you are and some of your responsibilities at Children's. And then as you were going through this pain management with Children's and in pediatrics, when did you determine that there might be something that may be commercializable or that would be able to get into an actual product?
Probably around 2 or 3 years ago, we appreciated that we had something that was commercializable. I started this work over 10 years ago, and the genesis of the idea was born out of concern for the preterm infant, actually. We know from experimental data that the opioid receptors or those morphine receptors are expressed, but they're not yet functional in these premature infants. And I wanted to know when in postnatal life they became functional. So we started coming up with different devices and methodologies to determine pain with the goal of answering that question. And we went through many iterations over that time. We started by looking at EEG as one of the technologies. We moved on to near-infrared spectroscopy. All of these things generated all kinds of information, but were not fulsome enough to be used in a commercial setting or answer the question fully. And then we had a number of serendipitous findings that really enabled the current technology to be developed. And that's where we recognize that and now leverage the fact that the pupil reflects what's going on in the pain centers of the brain. And because of that, we're now able to image the pupil and in real time, using our non-invasive handheld device, come up with a metric of pain, both its type as well as intensity, and a measure of drug effect as well. That realization happened around 2015, and we've been developing the technology since.
You really can't plan serendipity, can you?
No.
Yeah. So some of the greatest discoveries in the world have sort of happened accidentally. And was there one thing in your research that triggered this serendipity to lead you to the path that you're on now with your eye tracking device?
A fantastic team. Kevin Jackson, one of my study coordinators, was playing with some of the technology that we're using at the time. And one of them was a pupilometer, another was a neurostimulator. And that's when we made the observation that a pupillary reaction happened in response to a non-painful electrical stimulus. That's really the underpinning of the technology we're developing. So his curiosity and enthusiasm really powered this whole thing.
Well, that's great. And then also, you had the support of Children's National with the research you were doing, I would assume, to help fund it. But I understand you also had some additional funding externally through NIH to help progress your research. Is that true?
Yes. So Children's really supported all of the early development during that time and really positioned us to go out and spin out a company and get additional funding to develop and commercialize the actual technology that we developed. The NIH funding, which is essential because of the rigorous review that goes on and the non-dilutive monies, is really important here for a new technology. So we are recipients of a phase 1 SBIR from the National Institutes of Drug Abuse, as well as we were chosen by the FDA Opioid Challenge as one of the 8 companies out of over 250. They were seeking devices to address opioid use disorder. That's another backing that we've received.
That's another source of non-dilutive funding, which is critical for companies at this stage, correct?
Exactly.
And then also internally within Children's National, there's a great deal of academic research. And when I've talked to Dr. Newman and Kalela about this, I think it ranges $80 to $90 million a year, which is pretty significant. And they have become, as you mentioned, more aggressive in the innovation and commercialization world. So tell me about this whole process for the evaluation of commercial potential for this, who you interacted with internally, how the assessment was done, and then when was a determination to form a company, and then how was it formed?
Well, we have a tech transfer office. So essentially, there's an IP review, and we look at the space and see what competition is there. Is it a novel technology? Is there a market for the device? And was a business advisory council that basically made the determination that this was commercially viable.
And then once they determined it was viable, what were the next steps in your commercialization path?
There was some serendipity there as well. One of the investors actually was looking for investment opportunities. A non-invasive, objective measure of pain device apparently was attractive, and they found me they actually searched clinicaltrials.gov and found a clinical trial that was of interest to them and called me directly. We met. I showed them the portfolio of projects that we had going on at the time, and they actually selected what was then an 8-week-old idea. So when the investors appeared, we then spun out the company, AlgometRx, and at that time, so that was 2015, we closed a $2.4 million seed round in 2017.
Super. I mean, that's rarity in this world because normally entrepreneurs are out, they already have their business plan, they're out seeking investors. Here you had clinical information somebody found on a site, they took interest in it, and through that process, you identified your investors much earlier than what would be typical with entrepreneurs trying to go through this startup phase.
Exactly.
Congratulations on that. And the investors, are they from the region or are they national in scope?
Mostly from New Jersey. It's a syndicate of angel investors.
Oh, excellent. How do you find working with individuals or angels as external investors in a company that you're running? Well, actually, let's talk a little bit about when I say you're running. I think when you formed the company, you also got some additional management to assist you in running AlgometRx. Is that true?
Yes, I'm not involved in the management of the company. There is a management team in place. We have an interim CEO who happens to be the principal angel investor. We have a director of business development and a CFO and they take care of the day-to-day business. I serve as the scientific advisor to the company, and I'm the founder.
Great. Well, congratulations. That's a dream world to be able to find an investor who also has the interest in running the company. You can do what you do best, which is function as sort of a chief scientific officer. And then the business side, which is generally the most difficult side, is being handled externally with partners you trust, I would assume. So since the company's been formed in 2017, what's been the focus of the company? And when you look at the opportunities within the pain care market, where do you see the special niche that AlgometRx is going to focus on?
The global pain market is vast. And if you consider both pharmaceuticals and devices, it's 44 billion, or projected to be 44 billion in 2020. And given the opioid crisis and the need to come up with solutions for the opioid crisis, there's a tremendous demand for objective measures of pain supported by federal agencies such as the NIH and FDA and DOD. There are at least 4 business verticals for the company. And given the selection by the FDA with the opioid challenge of the drug screening tool that we have, the drug screening market itself is an $8.6 billion market. So we'll be targeting that first and then stratify thereafter.
Okay, so initially it was going to be focused on pediatrics, but when you look at the market, you look at the opportunity, you look where there's been a great deal of federal funding focus, it becomes a little more opportunistic to go after drug screening than it would have been to go after what your initial target market was. Is that correct?
Yes. It also includes pediatric patients, however. So there's the neonatal abstinence syndrome and babies born to mothers who are dependent on opioids. They are part of that population that would be affected.
Oh, that's great. And then where are you right now with the research and trials on the technology?
So we're still very early stage. We're just in receipt now of the latest iteration of the research prototype. So we're generating data in different buckets and satisfying the phase 1 SBIR clinical trials that are involved there.
Investors also like to make certain that in addition to something that's proprietary, they want to make sure that it's patent protected. What have you done to go through the patent protection process for your device?
So we have 5 utility patents that have been filed to have issued thus far. So we believe that we're protected.
Excellent. Right, because there are people that are unscrupulous out there that like to steal people's ideas. So I'm glad you have good advisors on protecting your intellectual property. And you've been at Children's National and in this region now for over 27 years. How do you find the biohealth capital region, as we describe it, as a place to do research, recruit top talent, find investment, and actually launch a new startup?
Well, it's been an incredibly robust environment in which to do that. And having access to the NIH, the FDA, BHI, the support that we've received at and continue to receive at Children's National, I can't imagine having that elsewhere. So it's a rather unique confluence of all of those things.
Yeah, it's the convergence of all of these different assets coming together, which you've been able to tap into. So you're very fortunate and glad to see that the region is able to support your ideas as well as the ability to commercialize the ideas. So one of the other things that we always like to talk about in this region is you mentioned your SBIR funding and non-dilutive funding. A lot of people don't go that route, but once you get into there and get accepted within the agencies that fund small business innovation research grants, it opens up a different door for you to help with the funding, but also establish independent credibility for the device as well as the company. Or how do you find working within that SBIR environment?
Oh, I think it's very important and it's been very helpful. We're certainly embracing the one that we have and are looking to get others.
So most entrepreneurs, as they're going through the early stages of a company, everything doesn't go perfect. And, you have a plan, you expect it to go down that linear path, but sometimes there's things that are roadblocks in the way. What do you think are the greatest challenges you have going forward with its commercialization plan? And if there's any gaps that you would like to see addressed, what would they be?
Well, I think part of our problem is that this is a platform technology, and because it has so many potential applications, it's picking the right application and developing that. And so part of what's, buffeting us along is, for instance, if the FDA's chosen this rapid drug screen. So obviously that it makes sense to pursue that first. It wouldn't necessarily have been our first choice to do that. So basically fine-tuning the market assessments, being able to navigate through the market, developing revenue models for any of these applications are going to be challenging. This is a new device. There isn't another like it. And so reimbursement and revenue models are going to be novel in this instance. And so we certainly anticipate that being a big challenge.
One of the big challenges with every new startup, especially in the healthcare field, is if you have an interesting product or device, the market will determine whether it's needed based on the willingness of someone to pay. And we were just getting into this topic, and I want to ask Julia, as you have been going through with your planning with AlgometRx, have you looked very deeply into the reimbursement issues related to a new device? And have you found areas where you think you have the greatest opportunity for payment for this product or service that will be offered?
We have, and we've done that very early because it is a novel device. And so we've engaged a reimbursement specialist who's really looked at the reimbursement landscape and has outlined for us what we need to do in order to get reimbursement for the device, and depending on the application. And so, for instance, for the rapid drug screen, we'll have a CPT-1 code in 2020, and the CPT-3 code would follow after there was enough data to support that. And the same would be true for the other applications as we proceed.
So the key is, for every entrepreneur, it takes a little patience, but a lot of persistence, because some things you don't have a lot of control over, and you're dependent on other parties to help implement your plan. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. For every part of the plan.
For every part of the plan. And have you ever gotten to a point where you say, I don't know if it's worth it, and do we really want to go down this path? Or how have you kept your passion up for this through some of the frustrations it takes with a startup?
I believe in the product and in the applications, and there's just how to get to the end point, not if we'll get there.
Right. It's a question of when.
Right. And so there's been an abundance of help, both regulatory, reimbursement, fundraising. I mean, we've had all kinds of help that has been invaluable.
Well, as we have discussed, it's great to be within the biohealth capital region and have access to all these resources. So I guess one thing I would like to do before we close is to ask, is there anything else Biohealth Innovation or our team can do to help you progress with your commercialization strategy?
We're very excited to have engaged you for developing the commercialization plan for the phase 2 of our SBIR. We're going to need further help navigating through the marketplace depending on which business vertical we're pursuing. We definitely need to fine-tune our market assessments. And as I said, these revenue models need to be generated. So we'll be turning to you for some of that.
Well, there's a lot for us to do together then, apparently.
Yes.
Yeah. And also one of the things that's exciting is that we've entered into a contract with Children's National and with Kalela to provide commercialization assessment and assistance with the promising technologies and research that's coming out of Children's National. And that's something that Judy Costello, Albine Martin, and the rest of the members of our team are very excited about working with you and other members at Children's because there's a lot of good discovery going on there.
Yeah, that is very exciting.
So is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners before we close on this podcast, Julia?
Well, I do feel very fortunate to be developing the device at Children's National and in the biohealth capital region because of the abundant resources. It's really been extraordinarily productive, and I intend to continue tapping them as we move forward.
Well, this has been a great education for our listeners and myself personally about this venture you're undertaking, and we'd like to thank you for the time you've given us to do this podcast today. And for our listeners, this is Dr. Julia Finkel. She's the Pediatric Anesthesiologist at Children's National Medical Center and a founder of AlgometRx. And if people want to learn more about the technology or have any engagement with you, is there a way they can contact you, Julia?
Certainly through jfinkel at childrensnational.org.
Great. We hope there's a lot of investors out there that want to pick up the phone or send an email to Julia and keep this technology progressing. So, Julia, thank you very much on this edition of Biotalk, and we look forward to maybe catching up with you a year from now to track the progress of your company.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Biotalk with Rich Bendis.